And our first one, the A stands for the authority of God, that we do educate with the authority of God and with factual information. So all of the grammar that you are studying, it can't be changed. History cannot be changed. Now, some people would like to. Some people would like to take things out of our history books, put new things in our history books, not study what really happened in certain situations with our economic system, you know, the Great Depression and all of that. But there are things that they don't want to, but the facts are the facts, and this is what happened. Depending on what author you read will determine the worldview that that person is speaking to you from. And we have a lot of worldviews coming at us. So I know from my standpoint, when I'm educating, we always have to look at the source, beginning with God's Word. And that's where we begin our day, and that's where we keep our education backwards from what the world tells us. So we do have authority of truth in Scripture. We also, the R would stand for reason to integrate knowledge. So taking all of those facts and integrating it in a way that we use in our everyday life. We're the only created being that can do that. I would like to say my dog reasons through things, and she's getting old, and she definitely knows what sounds to make to get me to do something. She actually was nudging me with her nose the other morning to wake me up because she had to go outside and she's never done it before. But she doesn't have the reason to know right from wrong. She doesn't know. I mean, I could behavior, I could train her, and if she gets in the garbage, she knows that's bad and she puts her head down. But to truly reason something, God gave that to us. That is our special gift. And we need to educate our children to use that gift. As they are watching things, I mean, so especially with older children, even watching the news, I mean, there are things being thrown at them, and how are they processing and how are they reasoning through? It's not that as homeschoolers we need to protect them. I mean, there are some things we need to protect, but there also is a time for them to come up against it. And what do you believe about this? And reason through, well, why do I believe what I believe? You know, it goes beyond my mom and dad told me. And that transition happens about challenge A when your child is 12 or 13. Their factual things, the things that they know, the things that you've told them actually become reality to them. And they begin to develop convictions at that point. So the ability to reason through, and we reason in a meaningful and logical conclusion. So when our kids in Challenge B study logic, my youngest and my oldest did not like logic at all. Gabe, my middle one, that was like the holy grail. When he did Challenge B that year, and logic, he said, finally you guys, this is what I've been talking about. So now I have a formula to prove everything that I'm saying, because he just knew how to argue, and he thought through things very thoroughly, sometimes even more than myself. And so it's a joy to see your kids go through it. It's not fun through the argumentative stage, but it is fun to begin to see them process through it for themselves. So reasoning and being logical, that's really important for girls to navigate too, because they can be more on the emotional side of things. So to really use reason and logic, that can be part of our education. And then the E, so experience is a big part of, I think, the Christian education and its experiences. One of the things that I appreciated, and really when I started homeschool, I've homeschooled the whole time. My two older ones were in kindergarten and first grade. Elijah has never done the day of school, and it's been great. He's wanted to. He's been the one that wanted to when he hit kind of right around 8th grade or 9th grade. He said, Mom, I want to go to school. I said, you can't. I'm a state manager and you have to be in CC for me to have my job, so you can't go to school. And then he never asked me again, because he really did love it. He ended up getting to know these kids very well and wanting to be there, and it fulfilled his social, he's my social one, so that's the only reason why he went. I had to make me a list. I'm like, let's go through the exercise. Why do you want to go to school? And it was about being on the tennis team and friends, you know, and being able, you know, all these other opportunities he thought he wasn't getting, like going to dances and those kinds of things. I'm like, well, let me tell you what really happens at these things. So experience, I think, that is what kept me from not putting my children in high school. So when we moved to Atlanta, there was a good high school right around the corner from my house, and we began going to Perimeter Church, and they have a huge homeschooling group there with about 300 homeschooling families. So it's gargantuan. And one of my friends started, invited me to a practicum. So that I didn't even go to an info meeting first. I jumped right into a practicum, and then committed to do essentials tutor before I even knew what I was getting myself into. And Lee Borton was my first essentials trainer, and I'm looking at her thinking, I cannot do this. She is so smart, and but it worked out great. But it was the experience that they were going to miss out on, and I felt like just between, I felt like I wasn't equipped. I did not feel that my education equipped me to educate my high schoolers, which is a lie. And I also believe that they needed more than me. They needed all of these other things. So what Challenge ended up being was an experience of like-minded children together being able to talk about difficult things. Unfortunately, the kids that they got in trouble with going through these years were CC kids, so they're not perfect kids. But it was the idea that community of people came together, and they were like-minded, and we were all on the same path of, we want our kids to bring God glory. And we will help you, and you will help us, and it ended up being a wonderful experience to go through. Kids go through stuff, and so to have, other families whose kids were going through stuff at the same time, and the academics, we're not going to get to this debate, research time, what are we going to do? We were all there together, and it ended up being a wonderful experience, even though it was difficult. So experience is an important thing, and it's one of the things that, Challenge offers, is that experience that you might not get at home. So as we contemplate that and think about the kinds of experiences, what would you say in your education, what makes an education man-centered? You think about that question. Any ideas? I know for me, when my kids were younger, those standardized tests, those Stanford tests that we had to take every year, they made me so nervous. I thought that if my kids did bad, somebody was going to come knock on my door and say, why are you homeschooling? You can't be homeschooling. The first couple of years, it was just so, I was driven by this anxiety the week before giving the test, and then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to give the California Achievement Test because I can do that at home. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I will never give a test at home again. It is, it is something to say to let your kids go and take a test, and CC does do testing. I don't know, have you all done testing here? Okay, so, but that fear, I think, is when I become man-centered in my education. And that can happen on a daily basis. I can be full of God in the morning, and then after lunch I am full of the fear of man, and I'm not making my education God-centered. What were you going to add?
I was thinking everything is measured. The kids are measured against each other. They're measured by tests.
Yes. Right.
And it all depends on what role they're going to play later on, what function are you going to have.
Sure.
How are you going to be utilized? It's like the utility.
Mm-hmm. That's excellent. So, I think at the challenge level, we begin to get anxious about transcripts in our hearts, kind of, oh my goodness, is what I'm doing enough to prepare my child for college, or for the state to recognize what I've done? Again, that's just fear of man. That is fear of this system we have in place. Now, I'm not saying you don't do transcripts. CC fits into a transcript. We have plenty of college graduates from, difficult schools. I can say I have a child in Georgia Tech, not necessarily because of grades, but because of tennis. And he's getting it. He's doing great in his classes this semester. So the idea, we can get caught up in what the state tells us the requirement, and we might have to do those requirements. But to be driven by those requirements is different. So just keep that in mind as we talk about challenge, and we're held a little bit more accountable to track what our kids are doing, to give a grade if we need to. If your child is on to college, and that's another thing. Are your kids going to college? That may or may not be. The culture tells us, of course, your children will go to college. If not, there's some sort of failure. I would hope that we have a higher standard of what is the Lord calling them to do, not what culture is telling us to do with our kids, but what is the Lord saying to do. And I know, my husband, of course, a college degree is important for our boys to have. I mean, they're going to have a family, and in the culture that we're in, if you're going to be in business, which both of them want to do in some sort, they need some training. They need a college education. So that has fit our family. It may not fit yours, and that's okay. You just have to discuss that and contemplate that with your families. I think Ephesians 6, tells us, do nothing as men pleasers, but unto Christ. So all that we do should be unto Christ. It shouldn't be unto the state of North Carolina or unto the state of Georgia. I also like this. There's a way that seems right to man, but in the end it leads to death. And when I think about that, I can't help but think about Gabe in this season that he went through of depression because of his grades. Because it was this first time that he was ever measured by a leg. And it caused death to him. And it was it was sad for him to go through that. Partly I did great and they took tests, but I felt kind of to blame because I put him in that situation before he was emotionally ready for that. And he's forgiven us now and he's fine, but it does lead to this turmoil, and not death, but it could lead to just anxiety every day of worrying. It could lead to you not obeying and running this race with endurance because it's just too hard, and I can't do what I can't do what all the state's telling me to do and do what CC's telling me to do. I just can't keep up with it. So take that to heart and to know, is God calling you to this? Challenge, I will say, is not for everyone, and here I am trying to get you all to do challenge eventually one day, but it may not be, and that's okay. God needs to call you to this. Just know we don't hide the fact that it's challenging, because if you look at the name, it's the challenge program. So we don't hide it. It is difficult. And I like this quote: "A fool keeps doing the same thing while expecting different results." When I was contemplating putting my kids in a system that didn't equip me to teach my own kids, I surely want more for them, right? I want them to be able to feel equipped to teach their high schoolers. This is that picture, and you kind of talked about it, utility. This is the visual of a modern education, putting the student in the center, having all of these separated parts that goes on in the school during the day. I would venture to say that the philosophy teacher never gets with the economic teacher and discusses what they're teaching to make integrations. That clearly isn't connected in our politics, so why would it be connected in our schools? It would be nice if they talked about philosophies and economics, or talked about science and art. There's connections there. Math and music. Math and music are completely connected. So making these, this does us a disservice when we separate everything out, and that's not how God intended for us to learn. I don't think that's how our minds were created to learn. So when we think about a man-centered education, let's do the opposite. Think of a God-centered education. So what does your school look like when it's God-centered? Yeah.
Well, God is in the center, obviously, he's the focus.
Mm-hmm.
But the emphasis, and for us, it's more on character and virtue than just knowledge. So that's one thing.
So have you seen that on a college transcript anywhere? Character, what grade did they get? Virtue, what grade did they get? Right, it's hard to quantify, but it is so important. I mean, God's transcript is much different than what the world says.